Welcome to part 2 of my 3 parts mega series tutorial on creating a nice looking Angular form builder using Angular 19, Angular Material and Tailwind CSS. As you know, if you have followed the first part, that we actually did this in the first part. We added a nice looking dynamic form builder in which we could drag and drop some fields and then we can remove those fields. Okay, so we covered quite a lot of ground in the first part, but now it's time to add more features to it so that we can make it more useful for our users. So we need to add this editor preview here. Then we need to add the facility to add rows, delete rows, and also allow the user to change settings for each of the fields that they select here like this. Okay. So a lot to do in this tutorial. Let's get started. But before that, just a reminder again that the code for all of this is available on my Angular shop. The link to that you can find it in the description. Now, I don't do sponsorships or ads on this channel, so it's really helpful if you guys can support me out there. So thanks in advance for your support. Okay, so let's first start by adding the preview form functionality. Now, to do that, we need to add a button toggle group right beside the form canvas. So let's go in our code again here and let's open up our main canvas component that we created just for this purpose. And here we already have a form canvas here, but we are going to convert this into a flex first, the container, so that we can lay it out like we want to. Then we can do gap 2. And then after this form canvas, we can actually then add the button toggle group. So the button toggle group goes like this, mat button toggle group. And we need to import this obviously module here, and we also need to import it from here. So material button toggle, let's import this. So mat button toggle module. So now we just need to add our 2 buttons within it. So I'm just going to copy paste these 2 buttons. So we'll have 2 options for that. So one is the editor value and one is a preview value. It's going to show editor and preview. And then the value we're going to manage by using just a signal state in the component. So I'm just going to add here a signal here called active tab, and let me declare this as a signal, and the values then will be preview or editor, and the initial value will be the editor. Okay, and then for this value of this mat toggle group, we can actually just use the value of the active tab here, or in fact we can also do another thing here, and we can actually just use the signal directly by using two-way data binding. Okay, model input binding. So we're going to do active tab directly here, and now whenever the value changes, it's going to update it in the active tab signal, and whenever the active tab changes from someplace, it's going to change the value itself. So it's two-way data binding. All right, so let's save this and let's see how this looks. So you can see here we have our editor and preview here. Now we don't need this tick mark here, so I'm going to just hide it by using the option hide single selection indicator true. Yeah, so it's hidden, and we want to center this form canvas here. So I'm just going to do items center. Okay, looks much better. So we have editor and editor preview. Now we need to add conditions here. So we have the form editor here, but we only want to show it when the active tab is equals to editor here. Okay, so form editor we are gonna put inside of this. But what should happen when we have the else case? Now in the else case, we want to show the app form preview. So let's create a component for this purpose, and let's create a new component here. Let's say ngg. Let's open up the files here as well so that you can see where we want to do that. So nggc, and inside of the main canvas hierarchy, we want to, in fact, main canvas is in components. So components, main canvas, and then we are going to give form preview. Great. So we have our form view component here, and now we can just import this here as well. Form preview. I hope it's imported this. Yeah, it's imported it. And then we can save this. And now if we see here, we can see that it toggles between the editor and the preview here like this. Okay, so let's work on the preview and let's flesh it out by adding some styling. So first we're going to add some styling to it because we want to show it a bit differently than the editor. So we're going to add a div here, and in this div we are going to give a bit of padding, and then in this padding we will have a sort of a panel which would be sort of a floating panel, and this will also have a p6, it will have a flex, it will have flex columns, gap 4, shadow md, and then we'll have rounded lg, border, and border gray 200, right? So let's see how this looks. So you can see we have this nice panel here. So I think we can remove the padding from here. So we're just going to remove the padding. We're going to do just py padding here, py padding here, not px. Okay, so let's see how this looks. And now you can see that it extends towards this, the edges of the form canvas which you want. So what we're going to do is that we're going to first inject the form service here. All right, so we're going to do inject form service. Okay, and then here we're going to use the new control flow, and we're going to say the row of form service rows. It's a signal, so we are going to do row id, track it on that, and then all of our fields should be arranged in what format? So they should be arranged in a flex with a gap 4 and with a flex wrap, and then we have our fields within it. So then we'll have a field of row dot fields. Okay, and we're going to track field dot id, and then within this we will then have your div, and then here then we can actually render our field. Now we already have the rendering code in the form field component, if you remember. So in the form field component we already have this ng container here like this. Now since we already have this, let's just create this into a reusable thing so that we can reuse this in our actual form field preview as well. So this is in effect a preview inside of the form editor, but we want this preview in the preview section as well. So let's just create a new component for this purpose. Let's call this ngGC, and in components main canvas we're going to call this field preview. Let's call this field preview. Okay, so we have this field preview component, and here then we are just gonna copy this ng container to the field preview component here, and let's import the ng component outlet here. And then this preview component, all of the code here will be similar to that. So this field will be input dot required. So input would be updated from here, and this is going to be the form field. Okay, so field we have this, but we need the preview component. Now this is our computer that we have here, and we also need the field type service here. So we're going to just copy this here. Let's import this, and for the field type service we are going to inject the field type service here. Okay, great. So this seems to be fine. And now we can just use the app field preview here in the form field component. So we can just add the app field preview here and give in the field here as the field that we got from this input. All right, great. We don't need to include this ng component outlet here then, and field preview component we already have. Do we need the field type service? Well, we don't need the preview component here now, and we also don't need the field type service, so we can remove this safely. Now we'll go to the form preview, and in this form preview we can then just use our app field preview, and we can send in our field here like this. Okay, let's import this field preview component here, and also we want to give it a class of flex1 here. All right, so that it extends to the width. And let's save this and see how this looks. So we have our preview here. Let's try out from a text field. Let's say we have these 3 text fields, and in preview you can see that we have our 3 text fields just showed like a normal form would. Okay, great. And checkbox, great, the checkbox also shows this, so the user can test out things here. Great, so our preview is complete. Okay, next let's add the adding rows and deleting rows functionality so that we can manage rows here and allow it to add multiple rows. So the first thing we need is we need to add an add row button here. So let's add that here. Let's go to our main canvas, and in the main canvas we want to, after the button toggle group, we want to add a button, mat flat button, and let's import the mat button module here as well. Also let's add the mat module here as well so that we can add a nice icon to it. Okay, so mat flat button is then gonna have add row, and then within that we'll also have a mat icon. This mat icon will be add underscore circle here. Alright, and this is only gonna show when we have the editor mode. Okay, so we're gonna do if active tab is equals to editor, only then it's gonna show this thing. All right, this button. When we save this, you can see we have our add row button here, but it's close to this, so we want a space between that. What we're gonna do is that we are just gonna add a flex a div. A nice little hack is to add a flex1 container so that it stretches to the end. Yeah, let's add the form service function for it now. We want to add that functionality, so let's do form service here. Okay, so in form service let's do add row here, and add row is then gonna have just a simple new row that we declare here, and the new row will be obviously of a form of form row here. This, as you know, is going to have an id which will be crypto.random uuid, and then we'll have empty fields here initially. So first we're gonna get our row signal here, we're gonna do then this underscore set. And remember, we need to make it immutable. So we're gonna use the spread operator here, the existing rows, and then the row at the end will be the new row here. Okay, great. So let's save this. Let's add row, and then let's go back to the main canvas and let's just inject the form service here. Okay, and then the form service, we are going to just click on this add row. We're going to say form service dot add row here. Okay, so let's just test this out. And now when we do add row, we have our rows here like this, but you can see that there's a bit of a space issue here. So let's add a space here in the form editor here. What we want is that we want a bit of a margin bottom. So margin bottom 4 here. Okay, let's see how this looks. And now you can see that we have our margins below each of the rows here. Okay, and now you can also see that we can add our fields in any row that we want. Great. Let's preview this and you can see all of our rows are arranged like this. Great, so adding rows works, but we also want to delete a row if you would like to. So let's add that next. For the delete button, we have it right beside the row here. If you can see in the final result here, the row is here and there's a cross here. So let's add this here. Okay, so this will be a section called the row controls. Let's make it a flex then. We're going to make it flex justify between, because we want to align it to the right side, and then we're going to just do item center to make it all center aligned. Then the first thing here would be then a span, and this span is going to be row just like we have here. And then after that we'll have a button which will be a matte icon button. Okay, do we have it imported here? So we need a matte button module and we need a matte icon module here, right? And let's add the matte icon button here. Let's add a matte icon inside of this, and we're going to call this close. And this is going to remove the row, the specified row that we have. All right, let's add the functionality for deleting the row now. So for deleting the row, we're going to add delete row here, and for this we just need the row ID, which will be a string, the UUID. Okay, so delete row, we are first going to check if the number of rows is not 1. So if it's 1, then we don't want to delete the row. We want to keep a default row at all times. So what we're going to do is we're just going to check for the length, that if the length is 1 here, we're just going to simply return it, so it's not going to delete it. Otherwise we want to delete the row, so we're going to first get our rows, this dot rows. We're going to get our new rows, and we'll simply use the filter function for an array, which is a very convenient way to create an immutable copy when we want to delete something from an array. So we just have to put this condition here that this ID should not be included, and it's going to give back the array without that ID. And then we can just set our this.rows.set to the new rows here like this. Okay, nice and simple. So delete row should work, and let's just add the handling for it here. So click form service dot delete row, and for each of the row here we're going to give the row ID. So we have our row and we have our ID here. Great. Let's save this and let's try it out. We have this nice button here. Let's just try to remove the row, and you can see that the row removes here. We can remove all of the rows if we have added, and we cannot remove the last row. Great, so we can add and delete rows now. Okay, now one thing though is really glaringly missing, and this is that if we add 2 rows here, for example, and we add our checkbox here, and maybe we say that okay, we made a mistake, we want to shift it to some other row here. We can't really do that in the current. This we'll have to delete this and add another one here. Okay, so let's add the functionality to actually drag and drop fields from across rows into this. And as you'd imagine, the first thing is to add a CDK drag directive to each of these fields here. So let's first do that. Let's go in the form editor, and in the form editor, let's also add another thing here. So if, for example, it's empty, we also want to add a placeholder, which is a nice little UI touch to it. So we're just going to add an empty div here. I'm just going to copy this here. Let's just save this and see how this looks like. So you can see here that we have this nice little drag and drop form elements here to tell the user that okay, you can drag drop things here when it's empty only. So for this app form field, we actually want to make this into a draggable instance. So we're going to first import our drag drop module here. All right. And then we are going to make this as CDK drag. And then we also have an attached data to it. So we're going to attach CDK drag data, which will be your field data here. So this is going to be the form field instance for that specific thing. Okay, great. Okay, so let's save this. Now, once we save this, you're going to see that a lot of things are going to be automatic here. So if we drag things here now, you can see that it goes to the second row here like this. But you can see that it does not drop here. So that is something that you need to handle yourself, because that is a data change that you want to handle yourself when that happens. And for that, we need to add functionality to the on drop in row here function, in which we had just handled the field selector that is dragging from the form elements menu at this point. Okay, so this is just one case handled. Now the default case then here, we will keep the case where we are actually moving things from within the rows. Okay, even if we are moving in one row, so for example we have two fields here and we are moving it here and there, let's say checkbox, we are moving it here and there, this case and moving it to another row are all going to be covered in one function, and that function we are going to call as the move field function. All right, so let's implement that move field function. Okay, so let's go in our form service again. So this function is going to be a bit complex because it has more steps to it than all of the other functions. So first of all, we need the ID of the field that we are actually moving, right? So field ID. And the second, we need the source row ID. So this is the row from which we are dragging. Then we need the target row ID in which we are dropping it, the field. And then we also need the target index. So we need the index where we are actually dropping the field here, right? Okay, so these are the four parameters that we are expecting in our move field here. And this is going to cover all of the cases while dragging within the rows and across the rows as well. Okay, what we do is that we get our existing rows here. And so the first thing we need to do is we need to find the field to move, and we are going to store it in a field to move variable. This is going to be a form field. Initially, it's going to be form field and it could also be undefined. So initially, it's going to be undefined. Then we also need a source row index, not the ID, because the ID is a UID. So we need the source row index to manipulate it on the ID. So we're just going to give an initial value here. Similarly, we are also going to do the source field index. So this first part, we are going to find out all of these things. So we're giving these initial values here. Then we need to find the source row and the source field. Okay, so we're going to go in rows, and for each row we are going to do row, and we also want to refer to the index here. So if row dot id is equals to the source row id, then we're going to assign the source row index to row index here. All right, then we have the source field index. So how do we find that? We're going to find it in the same row because we are dragging it from that specific row. So we're going to find that field here like this, find index, and this is going to be f.id is equals to field id. Okay, so this is the field that we want. So if this source field index is greater than equals to 0, means that it is present in this row, then we're gonna say that okay, field to move is basically row dot fields source field index. Okay, so in this pass, in this first loop, we actually find out these three things, and then in the next loop, we're gonna do all of the operations that we need, and we're gonna add some checks here before that. So if the field to move was not found here, then that means we just need to return. So that means that there's some error. We can't find that field here. And then we're going to create a new rows structure, immutable structure, in which we are going to actually make all the changes before setting it to the rows again. We're going to create the fields with the removed field. Okay, so this is going to be simply new rows and source row index fields, and we're going to filter it on this, and f.id not equals to field id. So this is the field id that we want to remove from the previous rows here. So these fields then we can assign to our new rows. So we can say new rows and source row index, and then we can do dot fields is equals to fields with remove field. Okay, so now I have done it in multiple steps. You can also do it in one step, but it is easier for me to see the steps and to also explain it to you guys. That's why I've kept it a bit more verbose than some others might do it. All right, so then we have removed the field here from the existing row, and we want to add it now to the target row, right? So let's find out the target row index here. So target row index is then going to be new rows dot find index, and r dot id is equals to target row id. If the target row index is greater than equals to 0, we're going to create a new structure called target fields, and this is going to taken the new rows, the target index, the target row index and its fields, and then we're going to use the splice function to actually make changes to this. So we're going to do the target.splice and then target index. We're not going to remove anything. We're just going to add it in this target index. And what do we add? We add the field to move. Okay, great. And then we just assign the new rows target row index dot fields to the target row fields, to the target fields here. All right. So as I said, a lot of some multiple steps, but it's gonna be worth it because we are then gonna be able to drag and drop between our rows and within our rows as well. So this is move field function in all its glory. And then let's go back to the form editor here. And below this condition, then we're gonna add the second case. And here first we're gonna get the drag data that is in the the drag data which is attached to that draggable instance. So we're gonna say event.item data as the form field. And then we also need the previous row ID. So we're going to do previous row ID and event.previous container.data as string. All right. So the previous container means it is going to be that this data is going to be in the drop list. So let us also check whether we have that right now to make it work. No, we don't have this data here, so it's not going to work. So let's add this data here. CDK drop list data. We're going to send in the row.id here. Okay. So it's just going to be a string. All right. So then here we are going to get the previous container data, previous row ID here. Okay. So I think we have all we need. So this dot form service dot move field, and then we can give the field ID here, which is simply drag data dot ID. Then the source row ID would be previous row ID. So the current would be the row ID that we're already sending it, I guess here. The row ID we're already sending because it's dropping in that row. So the row ID, the target row ID is going to be that. And in the index, we are going to get the event.current index. So that is basically given by the CDK utilities. The current index is basically the index in the drop list in which you are actually dropping the draggable instance. All right. So this is where you want to insert the field in the row. Okay. So let's save this and let's try this out. Okay. Let's add the text field here, the checkbox here, and let's another row here. Let's try out checkbox here, another text field here. So let's drag and drop now. Let's drag and drop this to this. So you can see that now the data change is also persisting. Put the text box back here, put the checkbox here. And within this, we can also move this here. So you can see the text goes here, the checkbox goes here. Okay. Now this moving stuff is going to be more apparent when we actually add animation. And this is one of the great uses of animation so that the user can visually know where exactly we are moving stuff. Okay, but we have added our drag and drop between the rows and within the rows. Okay, but since we are already on the drag and drop functionality, let's make a few fixes that you might have noticed, and I think some also commented on my previous video. One issue is that when you drag and drop this text field here to the row, you can see that it disappears from here, It should not disappear here. It should look like we are actually cloning the text field, not sort of moving the text field, all right? But as it turns out, the Angular CDK does not provide any built-in functionality for this. But we can actually add a workaround, add a hack sort of to handle this so that it looks just like you would actually clone something, all right? So to do that, we need to go back to our form elements menu here. So let's go to the form elements. And in fact, let's go back to the field button here. And for each of the field button, we're going to add some custom functionality here using signals. We're going to add a while dragging signal here. Okay, let's call this false. And then we are going to add two event handlers here, which the CDK utilities provide. So the first would be CDK drag started. And when it does that, we are going to do while dragging dot set is true. Similarly, we are going to do CDK drag ended, not dropped. So ended is going to be while dragging dot set is equals to false here. Okay. So now when the while dragging signal is set, we actually want to have another duplicate of this same element so that it looks like we are actually cloning things, even if it is actually trying to move it. Okay. So this is sort of a way to override the default behavior and achieve the same sort of look to it. All right. So how do we do that? Below this, we're just going to create if, and we're going to say if while dragging, then we're going to show that thing. I'm just going to copy paste this placeholder that I have here. So it's pretty similar to that. I'm just going to make a few changes here to make it, similar to the design that we have here. And let's save this and see. So now when we drag this, you can see that we have a sort of a div there all of the time. And once we leave this, it's actually, there's a slight bit in the icon. So I think we need to make this the same. So there's a scale 75 here in the class. So let's just add the scale 75 to this icon as well to make the icons a bit better. All right. So let's just save this. And you can see now, important is that the layout remains exactly the same so that the user does not realize that we are actually creating a duplicate of this here. All right. So this is great. We have achieved the same functionality using a simple signal for state management. Great. So this is one of the fixes. The other fix is that you'll notice once you do it yourself, you'll notice that if you drag it here, that's fine. But if you drag it back, you'll see that there's a preview here as well. So we need to disable this behavior as well. So CDK utilities actually provide you a CDK drop list enter predicate function that we can provide, which is going to specify whether it is allowed to drop things into that. Okay. So let's add this here in the form elements menu, CDK drop list. So we're going to say CDK drop list enter predicate. And this we're going to say that no drop allowed. This will be a function. Okay. So we need to define this function here. So no drop allowed. And this no drop allowed basically takes an item here. We can just simply return false here. So once you return false here, it's not going to allow things to drop into this. Okay. And now when you drag here and you try to bring it back, it doesn't allow you to drop things here, okay, which is a normal behavior. Great. So these are just some of the fixes that we can do to achieve the look that we want, the behavior that we want for drag and drop. Okay. Okay. So we have achieved quite a lot. Let's do that one last thing that we need to do to conclude this part, and that is add the functionality to change settings for each of these fields. So now at this point, you can see that we can hover over it, but you can't actually select any field here and change its settings. So let's start with doing that. Okay. So the first thing for the field settings is that we need to create a new model for that to contain those field settings. Okay. So let's go in our field.ts and we have a field type definition here. So aside from that, we also want to add a interface for field settings definition. Okay. This will be just a simple array specifying us what field settings each of the field provides. All right. Then we are going to use this field settings array to actually generate our dynamic form for changing the field settings. So let's add the field settings definition first here. So the first thing here would be the type of the field setting, and the options for this, we are going to hard code these here. So it could be either a text field that we are adding, it could be either a checkbox setting that we want to show for this, like for example, the required field setting. Then we can also have the select, in which we can allow the user to select from one of the fixed options for that field. Then we can also have another one, but we're going to add that later. So let's leave that for now. So we have a type here, and then we have the key, which is actually a string, and this is going to just specify what to change in the form field interface here. So for each of the field, which key we want to change in this. Okay, we want to update that value, the setting, and then we'll have here the label which we want to show on the UI for that field setting. And lastly, we also need options. For the select, we need to show the options, and for that we also need to define another type. So let's say that we give an option item interface here, and this is going to be a label and a value here like this. Okay, so here then is going to be an option item array here, and this is going to be optional because not all field settings types can have this. Great. So field settings definition is then going to be an array, and we are going to specify this here. So we're going to say default config, we're going to say settings config. Okay, and settings config is going to be field settings definition and array here. All right, like this. Great. So this way of doing it is going to make it really easy for us to add future fields, because we only need to specify the field settings definition here in the form of an array. Let me just fix this error here. So we have this field types of service which requires this. So we are going to just give an empty settings here for now. Okay. Similarly for this, we're just going to give an empty settings config for now. Let's save this, and now it's compiling properly. Okay, so we already have our field settings here. Now in this field settings, we want to dynamically generate this form based on our settings that we get from the field type definition. Okay, but first we want to set the selected state of the field. Where do we set it in? So we are going to set it in the form service. Okay, so let's go to our form service first. And in the form service, we're going to add a new set of state here at the top. So this we're going to call as the private underscore selected field ID. This will be a signal, string, or null. We need to specifically keep it at null because we need to also specify the case where it's not nothing is selected on the UI, all right? So the initial state will be nothing is selected. Okay, and then we want to access the selected field itself, not the field ID. So what we're going to do is that we are going to create a public read-only selected field computed here, which is going to give back the field that is selected, here. Okay, so we're going to do a computed here, and within this we are going to use a flat map. Okay, so we're going to do this dot rows. This is going to give back all of the array of rows with the fields within them, but we want to find all the fields from within them, so we're going to use a flat map. Now what flat map does is that it's going to flatten all of the fields within the rows, and it's going to give us a single array, and then we can find the field from there. Okay, so flat map, and it's going to do one row and then row dot fields, and then once it gets that, it can then find the field from within that. Okay, f dot id is equals to this dot selected field id. All right, so this is a bit complex, but it's really clean way to do it, so I'm using this way. All right, so we have our selected field, and now we need to have also a function to set the selected field. So we're going to do set selected field id string here, and we're going to do this dot underscore selected field id dot set field id here. Okay, so this is the selected field. Great, so let's save this and let's go to our form editor, or in fact form field. Yeah, so in the form field component, we can then add our functionality to select the field here. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, this is the div for the form field. So we're going to do click is equals to form service dot set selected field, and here we're going to do field dot id. Okay, and also we want to add a bit of styling. So once a field is selected, we also want to highlight that this field is selected. So for that, we are going to add some conditional styling to the class here like this. And in the newer Angular versions, the ng class and all of that is deprecated. So you want to use this singular way to actually give dynamic classes to your HTML elements here. Okay, so for in class, we will do form service dot selected field dot id. If it's equals to field dot id, then we want to give border black here like this. Otherwise, we don't want to give anything here. Okay, so let's save this and see whether this works. So now when we have a text field here and you can click on this, you can see that nothing happens. So this means that it's not being applied. So let's add important here because it might be interfering. Now you can see that once we select this and you have other fields here, you can select this one, you can select this one, you can select this. So the selection state works. Okay, let's also go in our field settings here. Let's inject form service here as well and store form service here, and then here let's do if form service dot selected field, then let's do selected field here like this, and let's just write the selected field label here like this, and let's see if you're getting it on the form settings here. So if you now select the text here, you can see we have a text field, we have this. So our state management is working great. Okay, so let's now build up this field settings based on this selected field. So within this if condition, we actually want to show our fields here. So we're going to do h3 here, h3 tag here first, and in the h3 tag we are going to say that okay, these are field properties, and we are going to do text excel to give it a bit of a this, and we're going to do font medium and a bit of margin at the bottom here like this, and then within that then there will be a flex column so that we can display all of our settings one by one. So we're going to make this flex column gap 6 here. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to get our settings from this field type. Okay, but all we have here is a selected field, so we need to get the field settings from the field type. So what we're going to do is that we are going to create a field settings computed here, which is going to derive from our form service selected field here. Okay, and since everything is a signal, we can actually do this really simply. So for field settings, then we're going to first get the field from here. So this dot form service dot selected field. Okay, now if the field is not there, we're just going to return an empty array. So there are no settings to show here. Okay, but if it is there, then we will need access to the field type service. So we're going to inject that. Okay, and here then we are going to do constant field definition, this dot field type service dot get field type, and we're going to just simply do field dot type here like this, and we're going to return the field definition, the settings conf from the field definition. And if we don't have anything here, then we're just going to return an empty array again. All right, so this is the field settings. Now what we want to do here is that we want to loop through these field settings and show them one by one. So let's add the for block here, and let's say we call this setting of field settings, and all we want to track is the setting. So in this case we are going to track it through the key of the setting because that will be unique. All right. Okay, so now we want to have a switch case statement here to show the field. So now here we are using a different approach from the approach that we used for showing all of our different field types. For example, to show all of these field types, we are actually using the field type service, and we are keeping things in the field types component, the preview component, and we are actually binding them together in the field type service so that we can actually use them throughout our application. We are not using a switch case statement to actually generate those on the fly like we are doing here. Now, why we did that for our main field types here was so that we could make it scalable and so that we could make it easier for us to add different field types in the future. But for the field settings, we only envision a few different field types. So we can actually just add a simple switch case statement and show all of the field types here. So there are maximum 4 field types. All right. So let's add a switch case statement here. And for switch, we're going to do setting.type, and then we're going to add our case statements one by one. Let me just add it for the text and show you. So you can see that we have the text type here and we have just a mat form field. Let's add this mat form field here, module here, mat input here for the text field, and also the forms module here because we're using that for that purpose. And you can see here that for the input, then we are using the field values thing here, and we have this update field here which we need to add here. So we are keeping this as field values here because we actually want to convert our selected field into any so that we can actually index this key here, because otherwise it gives a TypeScript error. So let's create a field values here like this, and it's going to be computed here like this. And the field values, we are going to get the selected field again from service.selected field. So if the field is false, we are going to return an empty object, okay, just like this. Otherwise, we're going to return the field but cast as any so that we can actually index into it and get that value there, okay. So here then we can use field values and we can index with the setting.key here, which will be one of those things, okay. And then we have ng model change, which is when we actually change things, okay. So for that we need an update field function here. Let's create an update field function here, and let's say update field. So this is going to take a field ID which we want to update. It's going to keep a key here, which the property that we want to update and the value that we want to update here, okay. And then we need to call the form service update function here, and for that we need to also add that. So but first let us add all of our fields here. So we just added the text field here. Let's also add all of the other cases here. So let's add the rest of the 2 cases which are our base cases here, okay. So you can see we have the checkbox case, which is pretty simple here. We have the field values and the ng model change just like this, and the label field that we are using here for this. And then for the select, we are using the options setting.options property that we have, and we are just using the mat option here. So we need to include this in our imports here. So let's do mat select module angular material select, okay. And then we also need to do the checkbox here. So we're also going to do the checkbox here, mat checkbox. All right, so we have mat checkbox and we have mat select here, and we have our fields here, and we have our cases handled for these 3 different field types, okay. So now before doing update field, let's just see how it's rendering on the UI. Let's go to our field type definitions, field type service, and the field type service, and we can add our settings config here. So let's add our settings config here. So for the input one, you'll know that the first one would be just a simple text, and that would be the key would be the label, and then the label would be also label because it's the label of that field. And then I'm just gonna copy paste some other ones here. And you can see that we have the placeholder, and we have a required field, which is the type checkbox. And then we also have a select to give the type of input type for the text field, whether it is text, number, email, or phone here. Okay. So let's save this. Okay, so let's make these the field types definition, and let's make this as the field types definition as well to remove this TypeScript error that we have. And let's just save this. And now if you have the text field here and you select this, you can see that we have a nice form here showing all of our stuff here. Now obviously if you change things here, it's not gonna change things at this point, but you can see we have our input types and we have all of the things that we need here. Let's delete this. For checkbox, we don't have it. So let's just add these here as well. So I'm gonna add just these two properties to the text, to the checkbox field here. Okay, just the label and the required. And let's just check how this looks like. So for the checkbox as well, you can see this. So you can see how easy it is to actually add different settings. You can add more settings to the fields, but just going in the field types and just adding these settings config here like this. Okay. So we can show our form here now on the field settings, but we can't change the field settings. So let's add a function for that in the form service. Let's add a function called update field. We'll specify the field to be updated, and then we're going to send the data, which will actually be the partial of a form field. All right, let's just get the rows first as we do before. We're going to create new rows. We're going to map the existing rows, and then all of the rows should remain the same. The field should also remain the same. We just want to change the property of one field. All right, so we're gonna spread the existing row as it is, but for the fields we're gonna do row dot fields dot map, and just for a specific field, if it's f dot id is equals to field id, then we're gonna return the field as spread the existing field and override the new data to it. Otherwise, we just return the field as it is. Great. So these are the new rows. And then we have this dot underscore rows dot set new rows here. Let's save this and let's go back to our field settings. And in the update field function, we are going to do this dot form service dot update field. And in the update field, then we can just give the field ID. And in the partial, then we can do something like this. So key and then the value here like this. Okay, great. So let's try this out and let's see whether this works. Okay, so let's add a text field here. Let's select this and let's say I want to change the label, and you can see that when I've cleared it, it automatically clears this. I can do first name here like this. Placeholder, enter something required. You can see that it changes the required property as well. Input type, you can see if you have number here, you can see we have this number things here. So you can see that everything, all the properties are changing right in front of us. Okay, but I think we don't have the placeholder here. So enter something does not appear here. So that only means that we need to change in the field types. For the text field, we need to add a placeholder here as well like this. So let's add a placeholder and we'll do field dot placeholder. In fact, we don't have a placeholder in the field itself. So we can go to the field dot model here, and in the form field, we can also add a placeholder here. And let's make it optional because it's not there in all of the fields here. Okay, so if it's optional, then we're just gonna give as empty here like this. Okay, so now let's try this again and let's do placeholder enter something. You can see that we have enter something here. All right, great. So our settings work here and they work fine for the text field here. Okay, so we have our basic field settings all set up, but let's add a new field and let's see how we can add, how easy it is to add a new field now. So if we try to add a new field here, let's say in our field types, we want to add a new drop down field to allow the user to add a drop down field. So let's just create a new field type here and let's call this a select field. So ngGC, and in the components field types folder, we're going to call this as the select field, right? So now the select field, everything will be similar to how we actually did it for the inputs, but it will just have the markup for a select field. All right, so let's say that we have this like this, and let's do mat select module here. Okay, and obviously we also have the mat form field module here, and then we have an input here, field input dot required, and this is going to be the form field. Okay, and then we have the field options here like this, because you can see that it says that it does not have the options field here added. So the options we added in the field type field settings definition, as you saw, but we did not add it to our main form fields. So we need to add it to our field.ts here like this. To the form field, we need to add these options, and these will be optional as well. These will be option item. and an array here like this. Okay. So if you go back to our select field, now you can see that it just simply shows if there are options there, it's going to show the option one by one here like this. And if there are no options here, it's just going to show option 1, option 2, option 3 as default options like this. Okay. So everything seems to be okay here. So we have set this up. Now let's go to our field type service and let's just copy the new definition called select field definition here. Okay. So let's add another definition here, select field definition. And here the type is select, the label is drop down, and then the component we can import it from here. The default config will have something like this, and then we'll have a settings config here as well. Now these two are fine because we have text and we have checkbox required this, but this third one you can see that there is an options item here. Now this should not be options, but this is basically dynamic options here like this. Okay. Now these are basically the options, but the problem is that the existing select that we have in the types, it only allows you to select from a specific or a fixed list of items. But for dynamic options, what we want is we want it to actually allow us to add and delete any number of options so that we can set it on the drop down. Okay. So for that we need another type, and to handle this type we will need another component that we want to create, which will allow us to add and delete these options at runtime. Okay. So we need to add the type here first. So let's go to our type here and let's add here like this. Let's call this dynamic options because they're going to change. And then for the dynamic options here, we're just going to add these in this options for the field settings definition here. Okay. So we're going to reuse it for the select and for the dynamic options here as well. Okay. Now we can go in our field settings, and in the field settings, you can see that we can add our case here like this case, and here we can say dynamic options. Now the problem here though is that this is quite a bit of code to actually get that working, the dynamic functionality. So we don't want to mix it up with all of this code and make this component really large. What we want to do is we want to create another component for that purpose. So let's create a new component, nggc, and let's go in components. And this is going to be in the hierarchy of field settings. And in the field settings, we are then going to have the dynamic options. Okay, so how do we set up these dynamic options? First, let's import these here, and let's do import the dynamic options here. And what type of input should it have? So it should take the existing options. Okay, so the existing options in our case will be our field values. Then just like we do with select here, we are going to give the setting.key because this is going to give us the existing value of this. All right, and then there will also be an options change handler event that we want to emit from within this dynamic options, and this is going to call the update field function just like we do at this point, and this is going to be selected field.id and setting.key, and the value then is going to be the event here like this, which is going to give back the new options that have been changed. Okay, so now we need to add these functionality to the app dynamic options. We want to add some initial layout to it, so there will be a div and then there will be a header which is going to specify what kind of options these are. So first let's make it into a flex here like this, items center and justify between. Okay, there will be an h3 here, something like this, and we're going to call this as the title. Now we don't have the title here yet, so we're just going to add a title as the input. This will be the label for that field setting here. This is just going to be an input, and we're just going to give an empty input here like this. Okay, so for h3 we're just going to style it a bit here. Let's say that we say font medium, text gray 700. All right, and then we're going to give a add button to actually add drop down items at the very top here. So we're going to do mat icon button here, add underscore circle. Now of course we are also going to import these things here, so mat button module and mat icon module. Let's just do click is equals to add option here. Just going to add a new option here. Okay, then below that we are going to add our main div, which is adding all of these stuff. We're gonna style this as flex column, give a gap of 2 here, give a margin bottom of 4 and then a margin top of 2, so that it gives a bit of space at the top here. Okay, and then we're going to loop through our options. So our options we're going to get here as an input, be a required input. It will be an option item array, and initially we'll have an empty array here like this. In fact, for a required one we don't actually need this, so we're going to loop through these, we're going to say option of options, track the option dot value. And we also want access to the index here because we're going to use it in our functions. All right. Okay. Then we have another flex inside of this because we want to show the delete button alongside the field here as well. So we're going to do flex items center, and then within that we will have a mat form field. Now I'm just going to copy this here to make this a bit quicker. So we have a mat form field here. Let's import this from here, mat form field module and mat input. Okay. And then we also need the ng model here. So we are going to do the forms module. And you can see that we have a mat form field here, and within that input, and then for the ng model, we have our option label. It's getting the label of the option here. And when it's going to change, it's going to update this option and pass in the index and then the new value here like this. Okay. And then for the button, we have a remove option function here, which we want to implement here. Okay. Great. So let's implement all of these functions here. So first of all, we're going to do the add option. Okay. So for the add option, we're just going to get the current options, these are options here like this. The new options are going to be a copy of the current options because we want to make it immutable, the changes. Then we're going to push the new option here. And here we want to give our new label here. We want to give option and let's say new options dot length because it's a new row that we are adding. We're going to auto name it according to the length of the array. Okay. Then for the value, we are going to give option dash the same thing, but we are going to give new options dot length plus 1. Okay. And then we want to send these to our parent component to update it in the state. Okay. So we're not keeping any state here. We're just getting the inputs. Whenever it's changed, it sends it back to the parent component so that it can update the state for it. Okay. So we're going to just call this options change, and this will be an output, the new output, and it's going to be an option item array here like this. Okay. So we're going to just emit and the new options here like this. Okay. So this will be an add option. And then we'll have the remove option and the update option. So I'm just going to copy paste the code here for both of them because it's pretty standard stuff. And basically we just remove it by using the splice for the new options. And for the update option, we basically just update label here like this, which is given there to update it. And then we don't change anything else. So it remains the same. And then we just propagate this here. All right. So we have update option that is implemented here. And then we can go back to our field settings here. And one thing we left out here is that we want to send the title here. And the title here is going to be our label here. It will be setting.label here. Great. Now let's see if we can actually test out this whole flow. So if you go to the form designer now and you can see that we don't have anything here. So we need to add it to the array that we have in our field types. So let's go in our field types here and we add this here. So let's add this and let's call this select. And let's do select field definition here like this. Let's save this. And now, voila, you have a drop down here. Let's drag the drop down here just to see how this looks like. You can see that it has these initial option 1, option 2, option 3. And once we have selected it, you can see that we have our required and our label here. Let's say we want to keep a gender here like this. And more importantly, you can see that we have our custom drop down options here. You can add options here, you can delete options here, and you can also change options here like this. So you can add, let's say you can add this here. Okay. And you can see here that it updates it in real time here. Great. So we have added sort of 4 critical field settings types, and I don't think that more would be required unless your new field to be added is really, really complex and it has some special requirement, to give some range or something. For most fields, these setting field types are going to be enough for the purposes. Okay, so we are at the end of part 2 now. We have added quite a lot of functionality. We have added the settings, the most critical field properties or the settings component here, which is a sort of a form builder within a form builder interface, as you can see. But it really makes it easier for us to add new field types and their settings and change their settings in the future. Okay, so just as a reminder again, that the code for all of this is available on my shop. If you want to support my channel, you're most welcome to get that code from the link in the description, and you can also try out this application with the live link that I've given you on which this app is deployed. Okay, so in the next part preview, we are just going to add the remaining functionality, which is the all important functionality of exporting this as code And then we are going to add the finishing touches such as adding material customization to it to make it look really good, custom material theming, and the most important thing about the view transitions, API animations to make this really interactive for our users. Okay, so I'll see you in the next part. Until then, enjoy.